you. Come on. I'm me. Come on, it's me.
Oh my God.
I don't even care about the treasure.
If you're done lying to me, then you should stop lying to yourself. You do what you have to do.
After Assassin's Creed the movie turned out to be less Creed and more ass, the video game genre of film still remains as the annoying piece of gum stuck to the bottom of Hollywood's shoe. The genre still today lacks that one undeniably great movie that would lift it up to a level of quality where it would be taken even somewhat seriously. And since there yet again is no BioShock adaptation anywhere in the horizon, the next video game property with the biggest chances of becoming that one undeniably great movie most likely is PlayStation's Uncharted. The story of the Uncharted movie very much is a story of blood, sweat, and sad fanbase tears. You might have seen the film making big headlines over the last couple years, but in actuality it has been in what one would call development hell for quite a bit longer, like a decade. Pretty much ever since the very first game hit store shelves, Sony has been trying to move heaven and earth to get this movie done. Writer after writer, director after director, version after version. And still, after all that, with absolutely nothing to show for. My initial idea for this video was to go through the biggest different versions of Sony's Uncharted movie and examine what exactly happened with them. But the problem is, that alone wouldn't really be enough. I'm sure you can find tons of other videos and articles already doing that exact same thing. So instead of doing only that, I wanted to take this opportunity to also do a new Uncharted focused episode of everyone's favorite show, Blueprint for Greatness. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go through all 4 main games of the Uncharted franchise in order and take one essential storytelling element from each game that the upcoming film adaptation should learn from. And at the same time, we're gonna discuss the different iterations of the film throughout the years and see if these iterations did successfully utilize those essential storytelling elements. This way, we'll not only know the development history of the Uncharted film, but we'll also end up with a blueprint that shows how the film can be made to work. How Uncharted the movie can be less ass and more great. The first time the Uncharted film came close to getting made was back in 2010. The person behind the camera was to be writer-director David O. Russell, known for films like The Fighter and American Hustle. The lead of Nathan Drake was to be played by Mark Wahlberg, known for being Mark Wahlberg. And if those 2 choices alone weren't controversial enough, the movie was also meant to take quite a few liberties when it comes to the central characters. Instead of Nathan Drake being a familyless orphan in search of greatness, the movie was to focus on the greatness of Nathan Drake and his world-famous antiques industry family. Nathan Drake had a father to be played by Robert De Niro and an uncle to be played by Joe Pesci. Aside from being total freaking bananas, it's clear that Russell's version of the film didn't learn the most important element featured in the first Uncharted game, Drake's fortune. This most important element being the core thing that makes Uncharted Uncharted. It isn't the big loud action sequences. It isn't the international antiques aspect. It's the characters. Despite occasional variations and additions through the years, the central characters and relationships of Uncharted have always remained very loyal and consistent to the way they were established in the first game. We have Nathan Drake, a treasure-hunting nobody who wants to be somebody. We have Victor Sullivan, an older thief/pilot who serves as a mentor and father figure to Drake. And we have Elena Fisher, a talented reporter who refuses to let Drake walk over her. What we don't have, what we never have, is Nathan Drake's dad and uncle who suddenly pop in to replace Elena and Sullivan. Because if that was the case, the story would then stop being Uncharted and start being more like a summer blockbuster version of National Treasure. To be clear, you don't have to copy these 3 characters from the games and paste them onto film exactly the same way. Of course not. But you do have to respect what the characters represent. If the whole point of Nathan Drake is that he's an insignificant orphan out to prove that he's actually part of a significant family, then maybe your movie shouldn't just give him a family that's significant. Because not only does that defeat the purpose of Nathan Drake having the same last name as Sir Francis Drake, it also destroys the core of the character. Long story short, the Russell version of the Uncharted movie got too much heat from fans and Sony ultimately pulled the plug on it, which was a good choice. As the writer and game director of the Uncharted franchise says, if the film doesn't respect the character of Nathan Drake and his relationship with Sullivan and Elena, there's no point to it. And so, if you don't have interest in these characters and instead want to do a movie more like National Treasure, then maybe just go do National Treasure.
Here's the thing, kid. We don't get to choose how we start in this life. Real greatness, it's what you do with the hand you're dealt.
When the did I ever ask you if I could come out here? Get this through your head, you Jew motherfucker, you! You only exist out here because of me! That's the only reason. Without me, you...
After the Russell version fell through, Sony went through multiple teams of writers to get the story exactly the way they wanted to produce it. This eventually led to a 2014 draft of the script that was meant to be directed by Seth Gordon, best known for Horrible Bosses. Luckily, this time around, the character issues had been fixed. There were still some weird choices, like making Elena Fisher a Homeland Security special agent instead of a reporter, which just ended up making the character more generic. Also, she and Nathan Drake have sex the first time they meet, which I thought kinda ruined their relationship.
Okay, Sergeant Morton here thinks that I'll be too embarrassed to tell you that I had him in my hotel room 3 nights ago in Baghdad. And whilst I was sleeping, he went through my things.
But aside from smaller stuff like so, the core of the character work is pretty faithful. The thing that impressed me about this version of the film the most, however, is its ability to replicate the feeling of the second Uncharted game, Among Thieves. If you don't know anything about the Uncharted franchise, Among Thieves arguably is the best game of them all. And even though I'm sure there are many reasons as to why this is, the most important one could be seen to be quite simple. The amazing sense of scale through multiple visually distinct locations. Geographically speaking, the story of Among Thieves is fairly centered, but visually and aesthetically, this game feels like it takes place all over the globe. We are outside and inside, we are in urban and exotic, we are in sun and snow. Every time you start to get even a little bored of the scenery changes to something entirely else. Just look at the train level, for example. We start off in a warm jungle and we end up in windy, snowy mountaintops. And because of this consistent change in scenery, everything in this game feels so refreshing. Pirates of the Caribbean 4, Indiana Jones 4, Tomb Raider, each of those films at times can get pretty boring. And what's the one thing that connects them? They all spent the entire later half of their runtime in a jungle. Same with the first Uncharted game. Even though it's filled with different interesting jungle locations, that doesn't remove the fact that they are all jungle locations. And at some point, all that jungle is going to start feeling repetitive. And repetitive very rarely is a good thing, in games or in film. Even though the 2014 version of the Uncharted film is mostly based on the first game when it comes to plot and villains, it does still draw clear inspiration from Among Thieves, down to the opening where Nathan Drake awakes in a wreck in the snowy mountaintops. The story hops from one visually distinct location to another, and it doesn't go to the jungle until Act 3, which is the right choice. I'm not saying that a movie set entirely in a jungle can't work, but I am saying that there is historical evidence backing up the claim that multiple aesthetically different locations in an Uncharted story works best. Regardless, this version of the film never got made because more and more directors kept on leaving the project. Most likely because Sony has been very adamant on what they want the movie to be. Furthermore, at this point in time, a new player also enters the game. The next big turn of events concerning the Uncharted film came in 2017, when Sony attached its new Spider-Man Tom Holland to play young Nathan Drake. Not much is really known about this new version of the movie, but it could be somewhat similar to the previous version since that one did also feature a young Nathan Drake. That said, seeing as the part will now be played by a big star like Holland, it most likely is going to be buffed up quite a bit. And this leads us to the next storytelling element that the eventual movie has to learn from the third game, Drake's Deception. In Drake's Deception, there is a section where the story flashes back to a young Nathan Drake and how he came to meet Victor Sullivan. And the section is good. It not only further develops the characters of Drake and Sullivan, it also develops the villain and this way supports the main story. But that right there is the word that should be kept in mind. The flashback section in Uncharted 3 is supportive. It doesn't take the spotlight away from the main story, it supports the main story. The primary focus of the story still very much is in the present with adult Nathan Drake, aka the actual Nathan Drake. Here's my biggest fear with this new Tom Holland version of the film. Instead of using Tom Holland to build an Uncharted movie, I am so very afraid that Sony is going to use Uncharted to build a Tom Holland movie. Tom Holland is a good actor, but he physically just cannot be Nathan Drake. All he can be is young Nathan Drake. And so, if Tom Holland is the main star of the film, then the film becomes less Uncharted and more Uncharted: The Adventures of Young Nathan Drake. Giving the Uncharted movie a flashback plotline, that's fine, but if you do that, then do it like the third game did. Firstly, in order to avoid the same mistake that ruined Assassin's Creed, you have to make the two plotlines connected instead of them being two separate things. And secondly, you have to make the flashback sections a secondary plotline that supports the main plotline of the present. Tom Holland as the young Nathan Drake can be a great addition, but the primary focus still needs to be on the actual Nathan Drake. Because when it comes down to the choice between the young Indiana Jones Chronicles and Raiders of the Lost Ark, I know which one I would choose. Currently, the film adaptation of Uncharted is closer to getting made than probably ever before. Tom Holland will star as young Nathan Drake, with 10 Cloverfield Lane's Dan Trachtenberg as the latest director. And if there's one final lesson the movie should learn, it's from Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. This one final lesson is to do something new that deserves to exist. Uncharted 4 very much is unlike any other game in the franchise, yet at the same time, it isn't. It puts the central characters in a situation they've never been before, but it does so in a way that preserves who they are. It introduces a new family member for Nathan Drake, but it does so in a way that complements his personality. It mixes up the relationships between all the central characters, but it does so in a way that makes them deeper. Overall, Uncharted 4 feels exactly like Uncharted, only done in a way that's new and improved. As a game, Uncharted 4 maybe isn't as good as Among Thieves, but it does mark a new high point in Uncharted storytelling. A new high point that kind of begins to blur the lines between game and film. A Thief's End is an interactive PlayStation experience, yes, but at the same time, it is as much of a summer blockbuster as any movie could ever hope to be. The characters feel real, the action sequences look very cinematic, the story is highly gripping and emotional. In some ways, A Thief's End already is the Uncharted movie that Hollywood for a decade now has been trying to make, which in turn might even make an actual separate movie adaptation redundant. But of course, don't take my word for it. Here's what Nathan Drake himself has to say.
And I'm not really involved. My opinion on all this stuff is, from what I've heard from fans, is they don't want an Uncharted movie, no matter who's the star of it. Maybe it's because it's such a cinematic experience in itself. And I think I have my other opinion about this particular game is I think the emotional investment people have with Nathan Drake is so high that it'll be very difficult for them to accept somebody else, even me, with my face as Nathan Drake.
Since Sony clearly is so adamant on making this movie a reality, it should take a page from the book of Uncharted 4. As in, whatever the movie version ultimately ends up being, it has to bring something new. Instead of just taking one game and directly turning it into a film, take the best parts that make this franchise what it is and build a new Nathan Drake adventure. Because after the movie-like experience of A Thief's End, a simple film version of Uncharted no longer is enough. A good example of this is the short film starring Nathan Fillion. It's a fantastic live-action Uncharted fan film, but it wouldn't really work as a full-length adaptation. Because if it's just the same thing as the games, down to the camera angles, then what's the point of it? I know what you're thinking. Filmento, first you say that the movie has to be like the games, and now you're saying that it has to be different than the games? That is correct. When it comes to film adaptations of already highly cinematic narratives like video games, the line between too similar and too different is very narrow and therefore very difficult to capture. And that most likely is the reason why no undeniably great video game movie still to this day exists. We have video game movies that are too different, we have video game movies that are too similar, but we don't have one that is just perfectly in between. With Uncharted, all we can do is hope. At least now we have a tangible blueprint on how the movie perhaps maybe could actually work. It has to respect who the central characters are and take them to various different locations, with the primary focus being in the present. And it has to do all of that in a way that's new and deserving. Who knows, maybe then we will get an Uncharted movie that is undeniably great.